Alrighty, well we're on day 22, and we're in, man, I gotta tell you about 1st and 2nd Samuel. When I was first getting acquainted with the Bible, I wondered where the story we read yesterday, the story of David and Goliath, was in the Bible. And then I saw that it was kind of halfway through 1st Samuel, so I said I better read this whole story. So I started in 1st Samuel in chapter 1, and I read the whole story of Samuel. I'm like, this isn't about David at all, and it's not even called David. Why isn't this book called David? Well, then you kind of get to learn this prophet. You know, some people call Samuel a prophet, and some people call him a judge, and I think he was really both. He was on the cusp of that transition. He was the last judge. And, you know, aside from Moses, he was really the first prophet. So we have in Solomon, we have both. We have a righteous man come out of the period of the judges that wasn't partly righteous. Now, he wasn't able to control his sons, as we read, and they started to drift away, but, you know, nobody can control their sons. You know, our hearts are wicked. We're going to learn that as we get later into the prophets, into Jeremiah and the Psalms. But this story is what really ignited my passion for the Bible. This whole story of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And in this we have the story of David. And David is really, like, as far as men, until John the Baptist, as far as men go, there's not a man that can even compare to who David is. There's not any character like this. And as we're going to read today, David is not perfect. David has some real bad choices and trash in his life that he goes through, and he goes through the consequences of that. And that was one of the things that really started to turn my mind from the Bible being a bunch of Jewish fairy tales to the Bible being actually true history that we really need to study, in the idea that victors do not write their stories like this. You know, a victor writes his story and leaves the bad parts out. Well, as you see today, and you started to see yesterday, David, I mean, isn't what we picture as a saint. You know, he wasn't a Mother Teresa going around helping orphans all the time. He was really a warrior king. And that's one of the reasons that God rejects him from building the temple for him, because he's a man of war. And just, man, I just really want to share my passion for the book of Samuel as we're getting into the, you know, we're not gonna finish it until tomorrow, because it's really a pretty big book. You know, if they didn't. And I noticed when I was looking at my Bible, look, we're finally getting somewhere. You know, we're not halfway through, but we're almost a quarter of the way. We're doing pretty good, guys. Well, we are a quarter of the way through now, so we're getting there. You know, it's not undoable. I've done it before. I haven't done it out loud, but it can be done. Well, let's jump into the text here. We're about halfway through chapter 3. We're in chapter 3, verse 22. The heading here says Joab murders Abner. Now remember who Joab is. Joab is one of David's mighty men. He's one of the ones that kind of spent all the time in the wilderness with David and just really knew David. So let's begin. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, because David had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he's gone. Now you know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and to find out everything you're doing. Verse 26. Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Serah. But David did not know it. Now when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into an inner chamber, as if to speak with him privately, and there to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. Verse 28. Later, when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or falls by the sword, or who lacks food. Verse 30. Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. Verse 31. Then David said to Joab, Send all the people with him. Tear your clothes and put sackcloth, and walk in mourning in front of Abner. King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered, as you fell on the falls before the wicked, as one falls before the wicked. And all the people wept over him again. Then they came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. And all the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, the people there and all Israel knew that this king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Verse 38. The king said to his men, Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak. These sons of Zeruiah, are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. Chapter 4. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, learned that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel became alarmed. Now Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding bands. One's name was Baanach, and the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon in Beerothite, from the tribe of Benjamin. Beeroth is considered part of Benjamin because the people of Beeroth fled to Gittaim, and have resided there as foreigners to this day. Verse 4. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame on both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but she hurried to leave. And she fell, and he became disabled. He fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. I had to practice that name in school, so I know that one pretty well. Now Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out for the house of Ishbosheth. And they arrived there in the heat of the day while he was taking his noonday rest. They went to the inner part of the house as to get some wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab, his brother, and his brother Baanah slipped away. Verse 7. They had gone into the house while he was lying in bed in his bedroom. After they stabbed him and killed him, they cut off his head, taking it with them, and they traveled all night by the way of Arabah. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, who tried to kill you. This day the Lord has avenged my lord, the king, against Saul and his offspring." David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble, when someone told me Saul is dead, and he thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death in Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and in his own bed, should I now not demand this blood from your hand, and then rid the earth of you?" Verse 12. So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and their feet, and hung their bodies by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. Chapter 5. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" Verse 3. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Verse 6. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought, "David cannot get in here." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is called the City of David. I'm going to pause right there just for a second. Now, Jerusalem had not been completely captured. Jerusalem is a city on a hill, okay, and the top of the hill was still occupied by the Jebusites, and the name of their city was Jebus. So, and we've heard some of that in the Old Testament there, in the times of the judges and during the conquest. But it's kind of confusing that they had not destroyed Jerusalem. They had not taken over Jerusalem yet. So that's part of David's job here. So
Thought they did.
No, they didn't. Verse 9 again. David took up residence in the fortress they called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. Now Hiram, son of Tyre, sent envoys to David, along with cedar logs and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. And then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and exalted him, his kingdom, for the sake of his people Israel. Verse 13. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem, and more sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of the children born to him there. Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. Verse 17. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistines into your hands." So David went to Baal Perazim, and there he defeated them. And he said, "As waters break out, the Lord has broken out against my enemies before me." So that place was called Baal Perazim, or Baal Perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. Once more the Philistines came up and spread out into the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, and he answered, "Do not go straight up, but circle around behind them and attack them in front of the poplar trees. As soon as you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the poplar trees, move quickly, because that will mean the Lord has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army." So David did as the Lord commanded him, and he struck down the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. Chapter 6. David brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000, and he and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name. Hashem is what it's called. The name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. The ark of God on a new cart and they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Eho, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanellas, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day the place is called Perez Uzzah. Verse 9. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of God ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, for 3 months. The Lord blessed him and his entire household. Verse 12. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those were carrying the ark of God, the Lord had taken 6 steps. He sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. He and all Israel were bringing up the ark of God, ark of the Lord, with the shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings, the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of the Israelites. Both men and women and all the people went to their homes. Verse 20. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked, in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would." Verse 21. So David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me over ruler of the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this. I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. Chapter 7. The Lord, after the king was settled in his place, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am, living in the house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." Nathan replied to the king, "Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you." But that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day, and I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of the rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" Verse 8. "Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone. I have cut off all of your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. And I will provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them any more, as they did at the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you." Verse 12. "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up from your offspring to succeed you your own flesh and blood, and will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does any wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands, by my love. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." Verse 17. Nathan reported to David all the words of the entire revelation. Verse 18, then David went and sat before the Lord, and he said, "Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And as if this were not enough in your sight, sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant, and this decree, sovereign Lord, is for a mere human." Verse 20. "What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, sovereign Lord. For the sake of your own word and according to your will, you have done this great thing and have made it known to your servant. How great you are, sovereign Lord! There is no one like you, and there is no God but you. But as we have heard with your own ears, as you have heard with your own ears. And who is like your people Israel, the one nation on earth that God went out to redeem as a people for himself, and to make a name for himself, and to perform great and awesome wonders by driving out nations and their gods from before your people, whom you have redeemed from Egypt. You have established your people Israel for your very own forever, and Lord, you have become their God. And you, Lord, have become their God. And now, Lord God, keep forever the promise you have made concerning your servant and his house. Do as you promised, so that your name will be great forever. And when people say, the Lord Almighty is God over Israel, and the house of your servant will be established in your sight. Verse 27, Lord Almighty God of Israel, you have revealed this to your servant, saying, I will build a house for you. So your servant has found courage to pray this prayer to you. Sovereign Lord, you are God. Your servant is trustworthy, and you have promised these good things to your servant. Now be pleased to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue forever in your sight. For you, sovereign Lord, have spoken, and with your blessing the house of your servant will be blessed forever. Chapter 8. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Metheg Ammah from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with a length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death, and the third length was allowed to live. So the Moabites came to David and brought him tribute. Moreover, David defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, son of Zobah, when he went over to restore his monument at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots and 7,000 charioteers and 20,000 foot soldiers, and he hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 of them. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him, and brought tribute. The Lord gave victory wherever he went. Verse 7. David took the gold shields that belonged to the officers of Hadadezer, that's how I say it, Hadadezer, and brought them to Jerusalem. From Teba, Berothia, towns that belonged to Hadadezer. King David took a great quantity of bronze. Then when Tou, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the entire army of Hadadezer, he sent his son Joram, to King David to greet him and congratulate him on his victory battle over Hadadezer, who had been at war with Tou. Joram brought with him articles of silver and bronze and gold and bronze. David dedicated these articles to the Lord, as he had done with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued, Edom and Moab, the Ammonites, and the Philistines, and Amalek. He also dedicated the plunder taken from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, son of king of Zobah. Verse 13, and David became famous after he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. 15. David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahihud, was recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Seraiah was secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites. And David's sons were priests. Chapter 9. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul whom I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. And they summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame on both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered him, He's at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodebar." So King David had him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. And David said, "Mephibosheth." "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will show you the kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Verse 11. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever the Lord the king commands. His servant do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. 12. Mephibosheth had a son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was lame on both feet. Chapter 10. In the course of time, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. David thought, "I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me." So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David came to the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite commanders said to Hanun, their lord, "Do you think David is honoring your father by sending envoys to you to express sympathy? Hasn't David sent them to you only to explore the city and to spy it out and overthrow it?" So Hanun seized David's envoys and shaved off the half of each man's beard. "Cut off their garments at the buttocks and send them away." Verse 5. When David was told about this, he sent messengers to meet the men, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, "Stay at Jericho till your beards have grown, and then come back." When the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rehob and Zobah, as well as the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, also 12,000 men from Tob. Verse 7. On hearing this, David sent Joab with the entire army of fighting men, and the Ammonites came out and drew up to a battle formation at the entrance of their city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in the open country. Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him, so he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them against the Ammonites. Joab said, "If the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to rescue you. Be strong, and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight." 13. Then Joab and the troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites realized that the Arameans were fleeing, they fled before Abishai, and they went inside the city. So Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. 15. After the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer and the Arameans brought from beyond the Euphrates River. Arameans had brought from beyond the Euphrates River. They went to Chelam with Shobach, the commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. 17. When David was told of this, he gathered all the Israel across the Jordan and went to Chelam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him, but they fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. And he struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with the Israelites and became subject to them. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites any more. Chapter 11. In the spring, at the time when the kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of his palace, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messenger to go get her, and she came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. And when she went back home, the woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." Verse 6. So David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the place, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. Verse 10. David was told, Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why did you not go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped out in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Verse 12. Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And at David's invitation he ate and drank with him. And David made him drunk. But that evening Uriah went to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. 14. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, and then draw from him so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah in a place where he knew that the strongest defenders were. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king's account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that you would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerub, Besheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall, and he died in Thebes? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, say to him, 'Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" Verse 22. The messenger sent out and arrived, and he told David everything that Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open. We drove them back to the entrance of the city gate, and when the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." Verse 26. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Chapter 12. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, "There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it and grew it up with him and his children. He shared his food and drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him." Verse 4. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Verse 5. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and all of this had been too little. I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him, and with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me, and you took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." Verse 11. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Verse 13. Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin, but you are not going to die, because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord. The son born to you will die." Verse 15. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child, and he fasted and spent nights lying in sackcloth on the ground, and the elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. Verse 18. On the 7th day the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us, and when we spoke to him, and how can we tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. 19. David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized that the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied. He is dead. Verse 20. Then David got up from the ground after he washed and put on lotions and changed his clothes and went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. He went to his own house, and at his request they served him food, and he ate. 21. His attendants asked him, Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat. He answered, While my child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Verse 24. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her. And she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. And because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedidiah. Verse 26. Meanwhile, Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites and captured the royal citadel. Joab then sent messengers to David, saying, I have fought against Rahab and taken its water supply. Now muster the rest of the troops and besiege the city and capture it. Otherwise I will take the city, and it will be named after me. So David mustered the entire army and went to Rahab and attacked it and captured it. David took the crown from their king's head, and it was placed on his own head, and it weighed a talent of gold, and it was set with precious stones. David took a great quantity of plunder from the city and brought it to the people who were there, consigning them to labor with saws and with iron picks and axes. And he made them work at brickmaking. David did this to all the Ammonite towns. He and his entire army returned to Jerusalem. Chapter 13. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimeah. David's brother Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning and after morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I'm in love with Tamar, but my brother Absalom's sister. Verse 5. Go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her, and then eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make me some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, Go to the house of your brother Amnon, and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down, and she took some dough and kneaded it, and made the bread in his sight, and baked it. And then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat it. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him, and then Amnon said to Tamar, Bring the food here into my bedroom, so that I may eat it from your hand. And so Tamar took the bread, and she prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when he took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, Come to bed with me, my sister. No, my brother, she said, do not force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? It would be like one of the wicked. You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king, but he will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. 15. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, Get up and get out. No, she said to him, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her own ornate robe she was wearing. She put both her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, What has Amnon, your brother, been doing? Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. 21. When King David heard all this, he was furious, and Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. 23. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. Absalom went to the king and said, Your servant has had shearers come with the king and his attendants. Please join me. No, my son, the king replied. All of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you. Though Absalom urged him, he still refused, but he gave him his blessing. 26. Then Absalom said, If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us. The king asked him, Why should he go with you? But Absalom urged him, so he sent with him Amnon, and the rest of the king's sons. Absalom ordered his men, Listen, when Amnon is high in spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, Strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Haven't I given this order? So be strong and brave. So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. And then all the king's sons got up and mounted their mules and fled. 30. While they were on their way, the report came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. The king stood up and tore his clothes and lay down on the ground, and all his attendants stood with their clothes torn. But Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, My lord should not think that they killed all the princes. Only Amnon is dead. This has been Absalom's express intent ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. My lord, the king, should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. Now the man standing watch looked up and saw many people on the road west of him coming down the side of the hill. The watchman went and told the king, "I see men in direction of Horonaim on the side of the hill." Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons have come. It has happened just as your servant said." As he finished speaking, the king's sons came in, wailing loudly. The king, too, and all his attendants wept very bitterly. 37. Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. But King David mourned many days for his son. After Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there for 3 days. And King David longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. Chapter 14. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa, and had a wise woman brought from there. And he said to her, "Pretend you are mourning, dress in mourning clothes, and if you don't use any cosmetic lotions, act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him." And Joab put the words in her mouth. When the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell on her face with her face to the ground to pay honor to him, and she said, "Help me, your majesty." The king asked her, "What is troubling you?" She said, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons, and they got into a fight with each other in the field. And no one was there to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant." They said, "Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we will get rid of the heir as well." They would put out only the burning coal I have left. They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth. Verse 8. The king said to the woman, "Go home, and I will issue an order on your behalf." But the woman from Tekoa said to him, "Let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt." The king replied, If anyone says anything to you, bring them to me, and they will not bother you again." She said, "Then let the king invoke the Lord his God, to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction, so that my son will not be destroyed." "As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "not one hair on your son's head will fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." "Speak," he replied. The woman said, "Why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself, for the Lord has not brought back his banished son? Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises ways so that the banished person must not remain banished from him." 15. And now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought, "I will speak to the king. Perhaps he will grant his servant's request. Perhaps the king will agree to deliver his servant from the hand of the man who is trying to cut off both me and my son from God's inheritance." 17. Now your servant says, "May the word of my lord the king secure my inheritance, for the lord my king is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you." Then David said to the woman, "Don't keep from me the answer to what I'm going to ask you." "Let my lord the king speak," the woman said. The king asked, "Isn't the hand of Joab with you in all this?" The woman answered, surely as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or the left from anything the king says. Yes, it was as your servant Joab who instructed me to do all this and put all the words into the mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. My lord has wisdom like an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land. 21. The king said to Joab, "Very well, I will do it. Go and bring back the young man Absalom." 22. Joab fell with his face to the ground to pay honor to him, and he blessed the king. Joab said, "Today your servant knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request." 23. Then Joab went to Jeshurun and had brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "He must go to his own house. He must not see my face." So Absalom went down to his own house and did not see the face of the king. In all Israel there was no man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair once a year because it became too heavy for him. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard. 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar, and she became a beautiful woman. 28. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the face of the king's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king. But Joab refused to come to him. So he sent a second time, but he refused to come. And then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab did go to Absalom's house, and he said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you, and I said, 'Come here, so I can send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Jeshurun? Would it be better for me if I were still there? It would be better for me if I were still there. Now then, I want to see the king's face, and if I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death." 33. So Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king or a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint in a case would come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Verse 5. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom behaved this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of all the people of Israel. Verse 7. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord, while your servant was living in Jeshurun in Aram. I made this vow, if the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. And Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" And 200 men came from Jerusalem and accompanied Absalom. And they had been invited as guests and went in quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also went to Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilosh, his hometown, and so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's king kept on increasing. Verse 13. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will come quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword." Verse 15. The king's officials answered him, "Your servants are ready to do whatever the Lord our king chooses." The king set out with his entire household following him, and he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. All his men marched past him, along with the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath and marched before the king. Verse 19. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You're a foreigner, an exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and today I shall make you wander about with us, when I do not know where I am going? Go back and take your people with you. May the Lord show kindness and faithfulness." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, as my lord the king lives, whether my lord the king may be, and whether it means life or death, there will your servant be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead and march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by, and the king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved onward toward the wilderness. Verse 24. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back into the city, and if I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and its dwelling place again. But if he says, 'I am not pleased with you,' and then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." 27. The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing, and take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar will return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. 30. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot, and all the people with him covered their heads too, and they were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told, "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." So David prayed, "Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." 32. When David arrived at the summit where the people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go with me, and you will be a burden to me, but if you return to the city and say to Absalom, your majesty, I will be your servant, as your father's servant was in the past, and now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their two sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with him. Send them with me, saying with anything you hear. So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. Chapter 16. Then when David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, awaiting to meet him, and he had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, and 100 cakes of figs, and 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. 100 cakes of raisins, and 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, why have you brought these? Ziba answered, The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and the fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the wilderness. The king asked, Where is your master's grandson? Ziba said to them, He's staying in Jerusalem, because he thinks today the Israelites will restore me to my grandfather's kingdom. Then the king said to Ziba, All that belonged to Mephibosheth is yours now. I humbly bow, Ziba said. May I find favor in your eyes, my lord, the king. Verse 5. As David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera. And he cursed as he came out, and pelted David and all the king's officials with stones. Though all the troops of the special guard were on David's right and left, as he cursed, Shimei said, Get out, you murderer, you scoundrel! The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, Curse David, who can ask, Why do you do this? Then David said to Abishai and to all his officials, My son, my own flesh and blood is trying to kill me. How much more, then, is this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. And it may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore me to his covenant blessing instead of his curse today. 13. So David and his men continued along the road to Shimei, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite them, cursing as he went, and throwing stones at him, and showering him with dirt. And the king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. Verse 15. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men in Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai, the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, Long live the king! Long live the king! Absalom said to Hushai, So this is the love you show your friend? You show your friend? If he is your friend, why didn't you go with him? Hushai said to Absalom, No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the Son? Just as I served your father, so I will serve you. 20. Absalom said to Ahithophel, Give us your advice. What should we do? Ahithophel answered, Sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone will be more resolute. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days the advice of Ahithophel was like that of one who inquires of God, and that was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. Well, that's it for today. I'm going to mark this so I can see it better tomorrow. See where we're at. Man, like I said, David was, number one, he was the greatest man that ever lived, but he was also, in that, he was also the most humble man that ever lived. There's a really good book that I read recently called I think it's called The Tale of Three Kings, or Two or Three Kings. It's really good, but it's like a novel about this whole story that we're reading about Saul and David and Absalom, and it just really glorifies David as a man of God, a man after God's own heart, and just how awesome he was. Well, that's it for today. Meet us back here again tomorrow for day 23. God bless you.